19 in the morning. This is take one. So from the top, there's a couple questions that you got to answer real quick when it comes to growing your own herb. One of them is indoors and out, and we're going to be talking about indoors because, well, outdoors, you're probably going to need at least 40 or 50 different licenses, and I don't know how to get those. So we're going to be talking about indoors. Indoors, you're allowed to do 6 plants as long as no one smells it or none of the light gets out. It's basically the same rules it's always been. The rules are, put it simply, don't be a jerk about it. Now the other question is, should we go with hydroponic and chemical salt fertilizers, or should we go with organics? And you got to think about why a person would go organic or why they would go with the crazy hydroponic stuff. And it comes down to your goals. Your goal as someone who's trying to grow your own stash with your own 6 plants, it's not to crank out as much pot as possible before your license expires. It's not to grow an ornamental plant, which is what the hydroponic system is designed to do. You want to be growing something that you can actually smoke if you want to. And I know a lot of people don't want to smoke, but I like to smoke, so we're going to be talking about growing good smoke. Now, organic is better smoke because, the same fertilizer that you use for a tomato, that's going to have a different effect on something that you're going to put in a pipe and burn. What you want to end up with is a fine white ash. And have you ever noticed that some of the pot you smoke, it's got like a crunchy black ash? That's probably the chemical salts that remain in the hydroponic grown herb. Another reason is hydroponic fertilizer smells really strong. It has this chemical, awful smell. Now, if you're growing in your own house, that's going to be hard to filter out. Granted, certain types of organic food does smell like guano because that's what it is. You learn which ones is going to stink up your house and which ones aren't. I have a few that I stick with because they don't stink the place up. I can pour them into the planting container. Don't have to wake up the next day checking my shoes to see what I stepped in. That's important. Now, one of the main differences between hydroponic grown herb and chemically grown herb is going to be how much it weighs. Now, as someone who's growing your own pot, you're never going to have any reason to weigh it. Do you care how much you yield per plant or how long each plant lasts you? Because that weight has nothing to do with how long that plant's going to last. When otherwise the goal would be to weigh the pot down as much as possible so that it's easier to ship. You're never going to send it anywhere. You're never going to take it anywhere. So let's focus on growing the best herb. Now, why did I start smoking herb, growing herb in the first place? Way back in 2002, I was going to high school, working grocery, and I came down with this thing called Crohn's disease. Well, Crohn's disease is pretty hairy, but the first thing that I saw when I looked it up online is, hey, they approved medical marijuana for Crohn's like automatically in even the strictest states. So I looked up a doctor's phone number, went out, got my script, started growing medical marijuana. About 2 years later, I was in a DEA raid, and you got to put things in perspective. This is right after 9/11, Dick Cheney, etc. It was a different time. But things are good now. We all get to grow our own herb, and that's what we're here to talk about. Now, in order to do this, you're going to need 2 different seasons at once. The way you do that is you create 2 different environments. When I say create an environment, what I mean is you're going to need a 24-hour environment. You get some shelves like from Costco. I like the big baker's racks with the wheels. Well, I like those a lot. What you do is you take that, wrap it up in that black-white plastic. They call that Panda film at the hydro store. Now, there's a lot of stuff that is good to get at the hydro store, but most of it don't take a second look at. Panda film, they've got that. Go there, get it. It's fine. It's all the same. Now, you want to set this up so that you're either going to leave it open about half the time or do some weird, what might be called a dark room style vent. And that's when you've got you create a PVC right angle to another right angle and maybe even another right angle so that it creates a light trap so that the light doesn't get out of this box, because it's going to be awkward for your other growing environment, which I'm assuming is going to be in the same room, if any light hits that during its dark cycle. Now you want a 24-hour box, and then you want the rest of the room to be 12-hour darkness. This 12-hour darkness is when the plant flowers. The 24-hour spot, we're going to keep 4 plants in there. The 12-hour darkness, we're going to keep 2 plants in there. The reason we're going to do that is so that we can always have one that's either harvesting or right about to harvest. It takes about 2 months to grow in the 12-hour, 2 months to bloom in the 12-hour part. It takes about 4 or 5 months to grow in the 24-hour. Did I get that right? 2 months, 12 hours, 24 hours, 4 or 5 months. Now when it comes to lighting, there's some stuff I'm going to show you. Like, if you can imagine that I'm holding up the thing that I'll be holding up, well, that's Christmas light wire. Old-fashioned Christmas light wire. It has what they call candelabra-based sockets. These candelabra-based sockets, they make LEDs, and that's what's in this thing. It's got little 5-watt LEDs that I bought from either an eBay or an Amazon seller. They came 10 to a box for $20. So 30 of these, 150, that's 150 watts of light. That's going to kick those T5 fluorescents that people were using before LEDs came around. That's going to kick their butt. It's going to be cheaper. It's going to be safer. You don't have to worry about breaking a fluorescent bulb. It's not going to flicker when it starts to go. These things will last 6 to 12 months under 24-hour light, and it's cheap. You can set this up for maybe $100. The shelf, plastic, string for the lights themselves, I don't know, maybe $150. But beautiful thing about this is you can keep adding lights to it as you see that the plants are desiring a brighter environment. And that's how I suggest, if you really want to just start learning how to grow and you don't want to go get ripped off, like you don't want to have to second mortgage so I can start my grow, like that doesn't make any sense. Plants respond to certain things. They like light, and then they like fresh air because of CO2, which we have a lot of nowadays. So that's pretty good, isn't it? And they respond to proper nutrition. And when it comes to proper nutrition, during the first phase of growth, 24-hour growth, you're not really growing plants. You're growing roots. And I like the EB Stone soil. I like their ultimate recipe. And they have one that is, the ultimate recipe is for tomatoes. Well, they sell the exact same thing for a couple dollars more at most places, called Recipe 420. So if you want to pay more and have a big suspicious bag of 420 dirt, you can pay extra for that. Or you can get the ultimate recipe, and your neighbors aren't going to look at you funny when you bring it in your house. Well, uh, don't let your neighbors see you bringing dirt into your house. So what I meant by growing roots, not growing plants, you got your clone. You put your clone into a pot. When that clone fills up, only after that clone fills up that entire planting container with root mass, is the plant going to start growing again. And yeah, you'd be like, no, I've seen the plants growing as soon as yeah, they do grow a little, but I'm talking about real growth where you're seeing this plant just explode, like every time you look at it. If you only look at it every 3 or 4 days, you're like, wow, this one's twice as big as it was last time I saw it. And that's after the root mass is filled. Different books say different things, but in my experience, fertilizing under 24-hour growth is usually detrimental. What those plants want is fresh dirt with fresh nutrients in it, and you have to give them more of that dirt as time goes on. So I usually do 2 transplants because I'm working on a little bit of faster cycle. I want plants a little bit more often. That's me. I'm sick as heck. Don't be like me. What you should do is grow 4 plants in there, and it's not going to take very much space because you're going to be adding these plants one at a time. So you got your plant that you just put in. It's this big. It's taking up its roots, so that's not going to take up any space. Then you got your plant that was in there for a month. Well, that one's probably about ready to be transplanted. You got that in a pot like maybe twice as big. And that one, it's getting kind of tall, so maybe you want to bend it over. Maybe you want to cut the top off so the lower branches grow out. You grow it how you want. Now the next one, this is where it starts to get big. You've got maybe like a 2-gallon pot. And since you're only growing like 4 plants at a time, well, the one after that, you could go with like a 10-gallon container, or if you really want to see a monster plant, look up these self-watering planters. One of them is called a patio picker. They have that at HomeDepot.com. The other one is the Earthbox Root and Veg. And it's this giant square box. It's like 2 cubic feet of soil. And what these have is a spout that goes down underneath the dirt, and you can water into that so that the water wicks up. You won't have to water as often, so they're more forgiving. And like I said, the root mass on these is huge. So you can grow pretty much a plant, as much plant as you have light for with one of these planting containers. So again, that's a self-watering planting container for the last transplant, and you're transplanting like about once a month. You go from, the clone to the half-gallon or the 1-gallon. Then you've got the 2-gallon, or maybe that's 1.5, whatever works for you. And then you got the big one. And you want these first 3 to be kind of small, because when you transplant, you're going to have to invert the thing, tap it, pull the pot off. And I like square pots for this, by the way. And re-invert it, and then put all the new dirt around it. The larger the plant is, when you're doing that, the harder it's going to be to work with. Big chunks of dirt are going to fall when you invert it. So give it time. Give it time to fully root into that thing so that when you do invert it, those roots are holding onto the pot. It's like pretty much a solid cube. And that pretty much finishes up our 24-hour growth. You've got as much light as you want. You've got the sealed box that you're either giving it these dark room vents, or you're just keeping it open enough. And keep in mind that you can start off just opening the door, and then as you get nerdier about it, you're like, okay, now I want to do those dark. Each one of these things you can expand as you go on. And that's really one of the beautiful things about this hobby, is that you don't have to have everything when you first start up. Now we're going off into blooming. And blooming is why you're growing pot. It's going to take, depending on your genetics and depending on what plant food you use and all that, it's going to take anywhere from 42 nights to 75 nights for these plants to fully ripen. Let's skip ahead to that ripening process real quick. And when those buds are starting to get all, when you see the rainbowy crystal, the diamonds all over it, it's just so, it's not ready yet. What you're looking for is when it starts to turn clear, where it goes from looking like rainbowy diamonds to grease. Just, okay, now it looks like the plant actually starts to look wet because those crystals are turning clear. And you call it crystals, but trichomes is the scientific word, but we all know what we're talking about here. As far as fertilizer goes, you're going to need to add a lot of it. You didn't have to add it. The dirt was doing it all before, but that dirt's pretty much dry at this point. So, as soon as the first night that you put a plant into your blooming area, you're going to want to start giving it plant food. And what I use is, a few spoonfuls of 831 back guano, a spoonful of 0017 Norwegian kelp. This is my special recipe. You get to figure your own out. And the last thing is 070 back guano. I add a little bit of water to that, let it sit overnight, swirl it up, dump it in. Oh, there's still a little bit left, rinse it out with more water, dump it in. But what did I mean by all those numbers? Well, the first number, nitrogen. Nitrogen is your muscles, your protein for the plants. Second number is phosphorus. That's your sugars, your roots. So your healthy roots, your fat buds, phosphorus. Now potassium, though, that's the good stuff. Potassium is like the immunity. I call this one like it's more of the soul of the plant. That this is what gives it its flavor. This is what allows it to fight anything that comes its way. And potassium is expensive. Even if you're buying chemical crap potassium, it's still expensive. I get what I get is $30 a pound, and I asked the nursery, local nursery, do you have anything like that? And they laugh. Here's $30. That's ridiculous. Well, it's 0017. She said, oh. Well, that explains the price. What else is there? Got our fertilizer. We got to keep doing this, though, because at the very beginning, the fertilizer for the beginning of blooming is going to be different than the last phase of blooming. You're going to want to gradually, you're going to start with more of the nitrogen, less of the phosphorus, less of the potassium, and then you're going to gradually go up in you're going to go down in the nitrogen, up in the phosphorus, and up in the potassium. And you shift this gradually. So say you're feeding the plants once a week. Every week you give it a little bit less of your high nitrogen plant food and a little bit more of your phosphorus. And for the last couple weeks of blooming, pretty much every time you water, you can be dumping in a ton of potassium and a ton of phosphorus. And that's pretty much it. You should be taking your own clones. You should be sprouting your own seeds, but that's really advanced stuff. And if you're just starting out, get a plant however you can once a month. Keep adding plants into your 24-hour growth once a month until you get to that fourth month. Now you're ready for the blooming. You don't need to have everything when you start your 24-hour growth. You can just have enough for one plant and keep adding more little bulbs and even more space. You can also be creative. You don't have to do that shelving. So, what's cool is those old entertainment centers that they used to have for TVs, and it's this giant cabinet, and what the heck do you do with that anymore? You see them for free on Craigslist sometimes. You could grow some great plants in those. And it's not going to be super airtight either, so venting them out will be easy. Be creative with it. And then also, I didn't mention anything about the lamps for blooming. Don't get those crazy high-intensity discharge bulbs that were invented like 100 years ago that'll burn your house down and run your electric bill to heck. Just don't do that. you can get shop lights, LED shop lights. Go for the warm white if you have a choice. That's 3000K warm white. But just search for shop lights on Amazon. You'll see, oh, this is a 150 watt shop light from Amazon. Let's see how much herb I can grow with that. And you got like a $20 or $30 lamp, and you grew your first batch of herb with it. You're not going to care if it has a high photosynthetic active radiation value, or how many lumens per watt you got. You're going to care that you got some good herb and you're happy with it. But it's been about 20 minutes. I guess I'll be taking your questions. What do you think, Sasan? That was 20 minutes on the dot from... It's a little bit early, like it's 11:40 now, but it's around the same time of day I'll be doing this. And this is just based off of a few notes. Like, I know that we're going to have a bunch of stoners, and it's hard to keep people awake. Like, a lot of people will be sitting down just because they want to sit down. They just got there, they just dabbed out, and they're like, whoa, I wasn't expecting that. I was out there with by the trees, and this one hit me with the dab. So I understand that to engage an audience like that, you got to really be asking a lot of questions, waiting for responses, and that sort of thing. It's a little bit more advanced than speaking to a scholarly audience of people who are ready to take notes and actually learn. That I've done a lot of meetings with a lot of people, and I'm not surprised anymore when people who have been growing for decades ask me the same questions every time, or people that are thinking about growing want me to explain the same, because like a big part of it also is just the storytelling, it's the fantasy. And there was one thing I left out that I really need to drill home, is that no matter how you're doing this, or how good you are at it, or where you're at in your learning process, you're still living the dream for so many people around the world who don't live where cannabis is legal yet. They all think about, oh, California, what's it like in California where pot's legal to grow in your own closet? So maybe I'll have some kind of leading question that'll bring me into that. And I think it is really important for people to not lose sight that even if you never make it past the first month with your plants, that there's still people around the world just wondering how wonderful that must be. And I talk to a lot of people who are frustrated because they do have to kill their plants because of mildew or mites or whatever. And it's like, just remember how great what you're doing really is.